We're moving into chapter 5 in our study in the book of James. And she was supposed to do the first section, and I had the last two. But she's been working on that first section for several weeks now. She's been excited about it. So I said, well, you still preach that. I'm going to move into section 2, and then we'll go back. So next week, Pastor Regina is going to be preaching. She's going to be doing the first part of this chapter. But today we're going to pick it up in verse 7. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of at a point where I'm struggling a little bit. Like last week, we preached on the life of Daniel, and on the Sunday that we honored Miss Martha and her faithfulness to this church for 40 years, I felt as I was writing that sermon energized and excited because it was something new. And one of the things about a year ago when God and I started having a conversation about, hey, God was telling me, I want you to start moving to this expository style of preaching, and we're going to go verse by verse, chapter through chapter through these different books. And because that's the best way for us to really know what the Bible says and to learn what it truly says. My argument to God back then was, God, what if they get bored? What if the people get bored? What if I get bored preaching it? And God's like, you're saying that my word is boring? I'm like, whoa. I was like, no, that's not what I know that's what I said, but that's not what I meant, God. You know what? I'm like, what if it's just, and so he's like, and so he's just kind of, we went back and forth, and I was like, all right, God, we're going to do it. And so now we're in this is week 11 of this, and I'm kind of at a point where I was, as I sat down this week, I was a little bit spiritually drained. I was like, I don't want to write. And because I had this done on Tuesday. When I started working on it Tuesday, I didn't know she was going to, I was just working ahead. And I was like, and I sat down, I was like, I don't really want to do this, God. So God and I had another conversation. I'm like, God, I'm tired, I want to go to, and he's like, once again, you're calling my word boring. I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm bored with it, not of it, right? I wanted to do something different. And God's like, and so he's like, this is what we're doing. And I'm like, okay, God. Because that word obedience popped into my head. And God said, I want you to be obedient to what I'm asking you to do. I don't want you to be obedient to what you want to do. And so I said, all right, God, I'm going to get into it. And I'm like, all right, trying to psych myself up too, because I felt a little bit drained. And it was just one of those things that, and I finally said, all right, God, I'm quit worrying, I'm going to start doing it. And I hadn't looked at this section in James since I've put together this outline months ago. And we start getting into it. And it took me, God is an amazing God, and God has an incredible sense of humor, right? I don't know if you know that about God, he does, and he's incredibly sarcastic at times, which really speaks to me, right? And there's this entire sense of irony when it's occasionally, and it took me all of 30 seconds, not even 3 seconds, as I started putting this together, that God was up in heaven smiling and kind of laughing at me, because what we're going to be talking about today is perseverance. And here I was 3 seconds ago complaining about not having the perseverance to finish this series. And God's just like, oh, no, that's what we're going to do. And that's where we're at. And honestly, once I started writing, it became one of my favorite sermons that I've written in a while. And so James chapter 5, starting in verse 7, we're going to be there in a moment. But before we get into that, has anybody ever heard of Bear Grylls? You guys know who Bear Grylls is? He's the survivor. He used to have a TV show called Man vs. Wild. And he's a survival guy, and he would go out into the wilderness, and he would, make survival shacks out of nothing. He would, drink his own urine, right? That was always weird. He would start fire with just sticks. He would bite the heads off of snakes and then, slurp them into his mouth like spaghetti noodles. He was kind of crazy, but he was a big deal for a while. And when I was in college, he was a big deal. And we would watch him every week. It was an awesome show. And a few weeks ago, we had our deer camp. And, we didn't kill any deer because we're terrible hunters, apparently. And so we said, we gave ourselves, we said, on Friday night, if nobody kills a deer tonight, next year for deer camp, we're not bringing any food. Yeah. We're only going to eat what we kill. And yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to work out for us, but right, we haven't killed a deer in 2 years of doing it, so maybe next year's our year, right? But Bear Grylls, he wrote multiple survival guides for people to read to learn how to survive if they find themselves in a bad situation. If they find themselves in a bad spot, this is what you need to do in order to survive. And so James, he writes this book of James with a similar mindset that this is not only how you survive in life when things get difficult, this is how you can thrive in life when things get difficult. So James chapter 5, starting in verse 7, it says, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned." Now, some translations, depending on what you're reading, at the beginning of verse 7, there's the word therefore at the beginning, which means that this section is a continuing thought on the first section. So the first 6 verses and the second 6 verses, they're connected. That started in the same thought process that begins in the beginning of chapter 5. Now, next week, Pastor Regina, she's going to get up here, and she's going to beat up on all of you guys. All you rich, luxury life living, fattened heart, murderous, miserable people. Read the first part of chapter 5. Now, personally, I would never speak to you guys that way. Like, I love you all too much. But she is going to talk to you that way. And so, because that's what in the first, and so the message, the first part of chapter 5, the message was for wicked rich people. And in the Bible, there's 4 categories of people and money. You have examples of godly rich people like Abraham and Job, who had all the wealth in the world, and they were godly people. You also had ungodly rich people like King Nebuchadnezzar, Pharaoh, the rich young ruler. They had money, but they were ungodly. Then you have godly poor people. Jesus came from one of those families. They were a very poor family, but they were godly. And then you have examples of ungodly poor, which are what King Solomon rails about in the book of Proverbs. So you have these 4 different categories. And so James, at the beginning of chapter 5, he's addressing the ungodly rich people who are oppressing everybody around them. Like, they're making lives miserable and hard for all the other people in there. And so he starts off verse 7 with therefore, and therefore is a transition word. And so now, James, he's addressed the ungodly people. Now he's addressing his brothers and sisters in Christ. And so there's obviously some fear, some worry, some anxiety about what's coming next from the rulers of the world, from the Christian people, right? There's Christian people out there, and their lives are being made difficult by those people in power and authority who are oppressing them and suppressing them and making their lives hard. Anybody can relate to that, of like wicked people running the world and making life difficult for us normal people, us believers? Because I see that all around the world today. And so James addresses this issue, and he begins with, be patient. Now, if you're anything like me, when somebody says be patient, instantly I become impatient, right? Like, I don't like patience. I don't want to talk about patience. Let's just move on. Well, PJ, patience is a virtue. You're right, it does. It is. But I also, every time I hear somebody tells me to be patient, I feel like laying some holy hands on them, right? Like, don't tell me to be patient. I want what I want, and I want it right now, right? And so James starts off this section with be patient, and immediately, know what I do? I tense up. I clench up because I don't want to be told to be patient. My mom, from the time I was old enough to listen, would tell me to be patient. And patience is a virtue, and it's just, no. It's something that I've always dealt with. And these people, they're living under a world that's run by wicked people, and James' suggestion is patience. Think about that for a minute. Now, how about some of those Old Testament fireballs we read about? Right? You ever read the Old Testament? Like, the Old Testament God is a different God than the New Testament, right? He used to send fire down. And I'm like, yes, that's what I want. I don't want to be patient on these wicked people. I want you to send fireballs down and destroy them all. That sounds better to me, but maybe that's why I wasn't chosen to be Jesus' brother, right? Like, maybe that's why, you can't handle this. Right? Maybe that's not why I'm not the supreme ruler of the universe. Because if it was me, every time somebody did something wrong, I'm like, straight to jail. No. You did it. You're going straight to jail. But I digress about any of this. But the word for patient here, it's actually a combination of two Greek words. Macros, meaning long, and thumos, where we get our word for thermometer, which means temper. So the word patience here actually means long-tempered, which is usually translated as long-suffering. So it's the quality of self-restraint in the face of provocation. It's the ability when somebody annoys you, when somebody disrespects you, when somebody mistreats you, you being able to have that self-control to not respond back. It's the quality of when you're sitting at the stoplight and you're paying attention, right? You're not on your phones because nobody ever gets on their phones and scrolls Facebook at the red light, right? That doesn't happen. But we're paying attention, and this is when like the light turns green and the person behind you, the moment it turns green, honks their horn. Jesus, take the wheel, right? Like that's the ability to not respond with giving them the, one finger hello behind you, right? Like those kind of, you're not going to do that. Like it's when you're at a restaurant and your Dr. Pepper's been emptied for like 20 minutes and the waitress has not come around, and the waiter has not come around. You're like, hey, you're like sucking on ice, and like jingling your cup. You put it to the edge and you're like, hey, and they're not paying. And the ability to stay calm during that time. This is the kind of patience that James is talking about. This is the kind of suffering long that he's talking about. When the world all around you is crumbling and falling into more wickedness, James says, suffer long. Jerry Bridges says it this way: the aspect of patience is the ability to suffer long, a long time under mistreatment by others without growing resentful or bitter. And some of you, probably all of us, at some point in our life, we've been mistreated, right? Somebody at some point has mistreated you, has talked bad about you, has done you wrong. Like I've got a list in my life of like people who genuinely, sometimes people mistreat you because you maybe did something and they're kind of retaliating. Other times, you just catching strays for no reason. That's happened to all of us. And in those moments, we have a choice to make. Do we strike back or do we suffer long? And if we truly want to become more like Jesus, our response when somebody mistreats us should be to suffer long. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 in the King James Version says this: charity, which means love, suffereth long. As people who claim to love Jesus, our response to mistreatment should be love. And according to Paul, that love will be patient and suffer long. Like that is what, like it's, some of the energy has been sucked out of the room in the last couple of minutes because people are realizing, like, you mean I'm not allowed to get angry with somebody? I mean, you're allowed to do whatever you want. But I'm just telling you what Scripture says is that when you are being mistreated, we should be patient. That is what James tells us. Now, some of you might be asking, well, okay, all right, I got it. I'm going to suffer long. I'm going to be patient. How long do I have to do this? Like, how long do I have to be nice to somebody who continually mistreats me? And I'm glad you asked that question because James gives us an answer in verse 7. It says, until the Lord comes. Oh, Pastor, I can't handle it. I'm being persecuted. I want to fight back. No, you got to suffer. How long? Till the Lord comes back. Right? Like that's not the answer that we want. I'll give you 2 weeks, God, and then I'm striking back. No. Suffer be patient until the Lord comes back. This isn't something that we just do in the moment. This isn't something that we do temporarily. This is something that we do from now until we die or Jesus comes back. Whatever comes first. Like, listen, you might not have to wait till Jesus comes back. You might die first. But until you die, like, you have to suffer long. You have to suffer it long. This is a lifestyle that James is calling us to, right? This is a survival guide on how to deal with life, how to get through life, how to not just get through life, but to thrive in it. In order to thrive and to reach our potential, we must be willing to be patient and suffereth long. All the persecution, all the mistreatment that you have experienced, all the hardship that people have put you through, when Jesus comes back, guess what? He will vindicate you. He is the one who will repay their evil actions. It's not your job to repay evil. Time and time and time again in Scripture, you see God saying, vengeance is mine. I will vindicate you. I will repay them for all the evil that they've done. You just follow what I've given you and let me take care of them. But until Jesus comes back and raptures us into heaven, or until you die, whichever comes first, right? Your choice, all right? And then he gives us, we have to be patient until that time. And then James, he's like, listen, I'm not going to just tell you to be patient. I'm not going to tell you to suffer long. I'm going to give you some examples for people to emulate, which is good. Like, I'm a visual learner. Like, if you can show me something, like, okay, I get it. And so James, he gives us 3 examples. He says, farmers, the Old Testament prophets, and Job. Now, there's a lot of farmers in here. There's a lot of farmers in this area. We live in an area that's farming is a big thing, right? We came from Kansas. We know a lot of farmers. Then Katie grew up in a little small, makes Windsor look like a metropolitan, thriving metropolis, right? Like, she grew up in a little bitty town, all farmers. So we know farmers, and being a farmer, I've learned this about myself. The more that I know about farmers, the more that I know this about myself. If tomorrow God says, you're no longer a preacher, you're a farmer. Like, whoa, I'm not trained for that, right? Like, if you're going to be a farmer. This is the reality. This is the truth. I wouldn't make it 2 years as a farmer. I would absolutely have a stroke within probably a few months. The stress and the anxiety and the pressure, all of that would just crumble upon me, because farmers, they're a different breed. This summer, my dad and I, we planted a few acres of food plots for deer. Right? We spent a couple of days. And when I say we, I mean he spent a little bit of money on it, right? Like, I worked, but he spent the money. Like, it wasn't that much money, but it was a little bit of money. And a couple of days worth of work. And we get the seed in the ground. And know what I proceeded to do? I became my kids, who are in the back seat when we're leaving to come to church. They asked me this morning on the way to church, are we there yet? Do you see the church? Like, where's it at? Show me. Like, you've driven this hundreds of times no, we're not there. But that's what I get home and I'm like, forecast. 10 times a day, every 30 seconds. Is there going to be rain in the forecast? Is there going to be rain? No, still not rain. Oh my goodness, all this time, all this energy, all this effort is going to be wasted if we don't get rain. That was a couple of days worth of work and a little bit of money. Now imagine if this was months and months and months of work and tens of thousands of dollars. I've got friends in Kansas who they're huge, thousands of acres, and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment and seed and all of these things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I would be a wreck, because because here, worst case scenario, the peas that we planted don't grow. Okay, no big deal. Maybe we don't see as many deer. But if I'm a farmer, and if the crops don't come, I don't eat, lose my home, I lose all these things, it's going to get me. And so James says, be like a farmer. Because a farmer, they're just built differently. And James is saying, listen, with the farmer, you control what you can control and let God take care of the rest. You take care of this. You get the seed in the ground. You take care of it. You get everything planted. You get everything ready. And then let me worry about the rest. So James is telling us, hey, when you're going through life and people are mistreating you, people are being mean to you, people are persecuting you, take care of what you can control, which is our actions and our behaviors. Let me take care of the rest. Farmers are patient. They suffereth long. And James says that we need to act like they do. We need to control what we can control and let him take care of the rest. The prophets in the Old Testament, they're the crazy people shouting about the upcoming wrath of God. Right? We read the Old Testament prophets, the major prophets, the minor prophets, any of the prophets, they're always screaming about the coming wrath and judgment of God, and nobody would listen to them. Not nobody. Very few people comparatively would listen to them. They were on an island all by themselves and nobody cared what they had to say. They were thrown in wells and killed for talking the stuff that they were talking about. According to Jewish tradition, the prophet Isaiah was sawn in half by King Manasseh. That I don't like you. I don't like what you're saying. Cut him in half. Right? Jeremiah was stoned to death by the very people that he was trying to warn about what was going to happen. Right? Amos was tortured by Amaziah, the high priest, the priest of Bethel, and then killed with a club by Amaziah's son. These are just a few examples of guys who were like, all right, we talk about persecution and our persecution versus theirs. Hey, we're going to cut you in half if you don't stop talking. He's like, I can't stop talking, so cut me in half. And that's what they did. And these are just a few examples. Think about all the other times that the prophets had to flee for their lives and hide in caves and run away because the king was going to kill them, or they actually were killed. So James is saying, hey, be like those guys. Like, suffer. This is your job. This is what I've called you. This is what God has called you to do. I need you to suffer long. I need you to go with whatever it is that's going. Jeremiah preached for over 40 years. Do you know how many converts he had in 40 years? I found two numbers. It's either 0 or 2. 40 years. I would give up, right? Like, if I preached for 40 years and 2 people got saved or listened, or if 0 people, but Jeremiah, God didn't call Jeremiah to save people. God called Jeremiah to be faithful to what God was telling him to do. And at times when he calls us to do something, we are going to have to suffer long. Job, if you don't know the story of Job, go read it. Go read it this afternoon. Dude lost everything. Literally everything. He's standing on the porch and somebody comes up and is like, hey, your kids are dead. Which ones? All of them. All your family, minus your wife, which maybe he probably would trade one for his wife. She wasn't exactly the best one anyway. Go ahead. Then another, while he's telling him, hey, your family's dead. Then another guy comes up and is like, hey, all your animals are dead. You've lost everything. Possessions, status, wealth, all of it is gone in a matter of a few moments. And Job has to deal with that. And Job goes through, we read about this entire process of Job processing and dealing with all this stuff. And throughout all of it, Job suffered long. And he gets to the end, God restores double everything that he had before. Because he was patient. He let God be God. He controlled what he could control and let God take care of the details. James says that we are to suffereth long like them. And he says to suffer, don't miss this. He says to suffer like the farmer because of the valuable crop. And I love that so much. When we are going through great times of stress or suffering because of the actions of others, we are called to be patient because of the valuable crop that is going to spring up. All of us, you may not see it in the same levels. You may have to deal with things, and you may not see. You may be like Jeremiah, and you preach for 40 years and don't see a single convert. But there is a valuable crop that you are planting that will eventually spring up. God has a plan for you. He has a desire for you. He has a design for you, and He doesn't want you to blow it in a moment of being impatient. He says you are planting, be patient because you are planting a valuable crop. And this is one of the things that I know about God. God will never waste a hurt. He will use every opportunity to grow something valuable in your life. But if you are the person that when that light turns green, the car behind you honk, instead of just, oh, sorry, you just like throw the car in park, open the door and get out, start screaming and yelling and everything like that. If you're that person, guess what? Your valuable crop is being wasted. Your valuable crop is going to disappear because something bad is going to happen. I would not get out of the car in 2023. Right? Like, you don't know what people are going to do. Right? If you're that person who gets angry at a waitress, be like, hey, and make a scene. Where's my Dr. Pepper at? I've been waiting. What is taking so? If you're that person, maybe the person sitting 2 tables over from you is going to show up to Sunday morning and be like, hey, I saw her at the restaurant the other night, and they were acting like a crazy person. They go to church. I don't want nothing to do with that. We have to be careful because we are constantly farming a valuable crop. And God is going to use whatever it is that you're going through in order to bring about His purposes if we will allow Him to. I can remember back in the glory days of high school, right? Like basketball. Like it was the good old days. We were playing a team, and it was a team we should beat. Or at least it was going to be a good game, right? And we get there, and I can't even remember all the specifics of it. I remember we're in... And it was one of those like really intense games. We were at their place, and so there was some home cooking involved, right? Referees were like making, they were putting the finger on the scales, and we weren't playing good. I was having an off night. It was just one of those things and the game, as it got deeper into the game, the pressure and the emotion and the intensity began to ratchet up. And our coach saw that, and he called a timeout. And he looked at me, because as the leader, right, as the captain, and the rest of the team, and he says, listen, guys, hey, do not let the emotions of this game disqualify you. Meaning, Don't get angry and pick up a stupid foul. Don't get angry and get a technical foul. Don't get angry and get ejected from the game. Do not disqualify yourself. Stay hungry. Stay focused on what you're doing. And if we do that, we will win. All right, let's go, coach. And know what we did? We put all the noise aside. We put everything, and we quit focusing on things that we could not control and focused on what we could control, and we won the game. And that is what James is saying. Listen, do not disqualify yourselves, because in a single moment, one act of you, like, this is the thing, the world, they want forgiveness over and over again, right? Like, oh, I messed up, I'm sorry, forgive me. As a Christian, you forgive me. But the moment that a Christian messes up, like, see, you're a hypocrite, I know it, and it's not fair. Like, we're people too, right? Some of it we kind of brought upon ourselves, like the moral majority act like us, right? But it's not fair, we're still people. And so James is saying you've got to be careful. Do not disqualify yourself by acting impatiently or responding inappropriately, because if you do that, the potential is that you will lose your valuable crop. Don't disqualify yourself by responding inappropriately. Suffereth long. And as I begin to close this morning, and before you get too excited, I've got like 3 different closings. So you got an extra hour of sleep. The Chiefs played this morning. Like I figure I got an extra hour here. So it's part 1 closing. There's one more part that James talked about to this whole suffereth long mindset. Verse 9, he says, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Sometimes my wife will do what wives do and ask me to do a project around the house, right? That's wives, right? Husbands, we agree that happens. Sometimes she will be like, hey, I know it's late October and the weather's cooling off and the deer are moving, but we're not going to hunt. You're not going to hunt tonight. We're going to go take family pictures. Run it back by me again, because I thought you said it's late October and you're taking family pictures, in the evening. She's like, yeah, that's what. So sometimes, as husbands, we have to suffer long as well, right? Like, these are the things that happens occasionally. Like, it's the small things. Now, in that moment, I have a decision to make, right? I have a moment. Do I do it without grumbling, or do I do it with grumbling? Notice there was not a don't do it at all option. Do it without grumbling or do it with grumbling. So I have a decision. Listen, and this is conversations, and every man in here is going to know exactly where I'm going, and they're going to agree with me. If you're a husband, you know exactly where I'm going. I have a decision to make. Now, the problem is I have to do it. I don't want to do it. And I really, really, really don't want to do it. But if I do it without grumbling, I'm going to get credit. Right? We love credit. Right? Brownie points and credit for a man and a husband, that is the best thing ever. And so if I can keep my mouth shut during the 14 hours of taking family pictures, maybe it's 30 minutes. I don't know. It seems like 14 hours. If I keep my mouth shut, I'm going to get credit. But if I do it with grumbling, guess what? She's going to be like, yeah, you did it, but you complained and whined and griped the whole time. And I don't get credit. So we have a decision to make now. James is saying, listen, you're going to go through hardships. You're going to go through these things. Now you have a decision to make. Are you going to persevere through all of this by keeping your mouth shut and just keeping your head down? All right, God, I'm not going to let my emotions get the better of me. I'm going to follow what you have for me. I'm not going to grumble. I'm not going to be upset. I'm just going to do it. Or you can go through the hardships and go, why are you doing this? Why are you? And if we do it that way, guess what? We're not following what God has for us. We are going to go through hard times, oppression, persecution, and I really hate using the word persecution in the American church because we really don't have any idea of what persecution is. But persecution in James and other places in scriptures tells us that's going to happen. But it also says we need to be careful how we suffereth long. It's not just that we're going to. How are you going to do it? And the word for grumble means to sigh or groan or murmur. We are going to have to take late October family pictures. We are going to have to go through hardships, and God wants us to learn to do so without groaning or sighing. He doesn't want us to blame our problems on our brothers. Depending on what translations you have and you're reading. Some says, don't blame your brothers for your problems. Take responsibility for them. He doesn't want us to blame them on somebody else. He wants us to be patient and wait and let God produce the fruit that He wants to produce in our life. Remember, you are producing a valuable crop. Remember that about when you're feeling down and you're feeling bad about yourself and you're feeling like you're not being used or utilized and you feel like you're wasting your time. Remember, Scripture says that you are producing a valuable crop. Just keep your head down, keep controlling what you can control, and let God control everything else. Verse 9 says that the judge is waiting at the door. Now, here's the thing. Jesus is coming back. Right? We're all in agreement on that, hopefully. Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back, and he will either vindicate us or he will judge us. Now, for me, I want Jesus coming back to vindicate me, not to judge me. Right? Like that's what I want. I want vindication Jesus, not judgment Jesus. And so I have a decision to make, and Scripture says that if we are grumbling and whining and complaining and doing all these things and being impatient, all these things, then Jesus, then I get judgment Jesus. He's waiting to come back, but he wants to come back as vindicator Jesus. Worship team, you guys, come see, it was a short closing. We're now second closing. In verse 10, we read the word patience again. But this time, the word that is used for patience is different. Before, it was used to describe patience and long-suffering with people, but the word for it now means for endurance or perseverance with circumstances. So James is talking about us having patience with people, but also having patience in our circumstances. In other words, everything. People, circumstances, patience. That's what James wants from us. Everything that we face and that we do, we need to have patience. People, let's be honest, not other people. People can wear you out. Right? Like I'm not being crazy when I say, like people, like, has you ever heard this, ever thought this? Like, I love humanity, I just don't like people. You ever thought that way? Like people sometimes can wear us out, and everything that we face and do, we need to have patience. It's sometimes I love life, but circumstances get in the way. We can all relate to that, and James is saying patience. When people wear you out, patience. When life and circumstances are draining you, patience. We have to learn to be patient and persevere through whatever it is that we are going through. Will you stand with me? James says, last group, he says to look as a source of hope is the prophets. And we don't know exactly which prophets he's talking about, but let's just use Elijah for a moment. For today, we're going to use Elijah. Elijah, if you know his story, did everything right. God says, do this. Elijah said, okay, do this. Okay. And he goes on and on and on, and he is just faced with opposition. The king, the queen, they wanted to kill him. All these things, people wouldn't listen to him. They were rejecting his over and over and over again. And finally, Elijah gets to a point when he says, God, kill me. Just kill me, God. I'm done. Now, I've been exhausted at times, right? Circumstances or people or life or whatever. But I've never prayed, God, kill me. I may have prayed for God to take that other person home. I would never do that. I never prayed for God to kill me. Elijah is at the end of his rope. He's done his patience. He's run out of patience. And God says, listen. God shows up and he talks to me and said, listen, dude, chill out, relax. Go take a nap. Let me bake you a cake. Angel food, I'm sure. Some of you will get that at lunch. Take a nap. Eat some cake, and I'm going to show up. I'm going to talk to you. So Elijah, he goes, takes a nap, he eats some cake, God shows up. God shows up, and the first thing you hear, there's a tornado that comes by. God's not in the tornado. Then an earthquake comes by. God's not in the earthquake. Then a fireball from heaven comes by. God's not in the fire. After the earthquake, after the fire, after the tornado, a gentle, small voice shows up and said, Elijah, I'm here for you. God shows up in a small, quiet voice. He says, take a nap, get some food, talk to me. Let's talk this out because that's the God that we serve. He understands that you are going through life and life is exhausting, it's tiring, and you're just at the point you don't know what you're going to do next. He said, listen, calm down, take a breath, eat some cake, take a nap. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about this because whether you see it or not, you are producing a valuable crop in your life. It may not be now, it may not be tomorrow, it may not be next week before you see the benefits of it, but all of us are producing that valuable crop. And God says, listen, just be patient with me. Let me handle it. You control what you can control, and I'll control the rest. And if we do that, we will reap a harvest. Do not disqualify yourself. Do not get anxious and overbearing and too quick. It's like, I don't have enough patience for this, and just go do something stupid, because you can disqualify yourself. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and I said, listen, man, you got a great future. You have a bright future ahead of you. Don't disqualify yourself by doing something stupid now, because decision now can impact forever. Don't disqualify yourself. Respond accordingly every single time. How long do we have to be patient for? How long do we have to suffer long for? Till Jesus comes back. This is an everyday thing. If you want to reach your potential, if I want to reach my potential, if we want to reach our potential, we have to learn to be patient, and I don't like patience, right? I want the full harvest right now. All right, God, we're doing it. Send the people. No, send more people. Send all the people. No, I want to get where we're going. We're going to be at in 5 years. I want to be there by Christmas. How do we get there by Christmas? God said, no. Suffereth long. Be patient. The valuable crop is coming.